Can you honestly ever know another person? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. Can you ever honestly know another person? It's already difficult enough to know thyself, which some people think takes a whole lifetime. Other people think it only takes, 10 or 15 years. But let's say you do know yourself, right? Let's say that to truly know another person, you've at least got to know yourself first. That seems a reasonable prerequisite, because how can you truly know another person if you don't know who you are, right? And in studying ourselves and getting to know ourselves, we find out the things that are uniquely us. And then we also find the things that are universal, things that are part of every single person. They're universal human condition. And so in the study of ourselves, we find that out. Okay, cool. That's a universal human condition thing, and that's me. Whether it's my soul or my personality or just whatever, aggregate of my experiences. And then once we know ourselves, and we want to get to know other people. So then when we start to get to know other people, how much of that is us finding out about them that which is the universal human trait? And then how much of it is that we're finding out about them as a unique individual? And at what point are we saying that we know that person? And then can we honestly say that, like, we've really got to know that person? We know who they are. And in that moment that we're comfortable with that, are we saying that we know the parts of them that are part of the universal human condition? Or are we saying that we've gotten to know them as an individual? And to what level do we need to satisfy that we say when we know them that we know them? Are we saying that we just know their personal history? Are we saying we know the things they like to eat? Or are we saying that we know their deeper psychology, that we know their motivations, we know their intrinsic character, we know the composition of their soul to some degree? What level of depth are we saying is required for us to truly say that we honestly know another person? Do we need to know the contents of their heart? For a lot of people in a romantic relationship, that's really what they're trying to get to. They want to know the heart motivation and the heart harmony. And how does that come in? Right? So when we're trying to say, can we honestly know another person? Is it enough to say that, like, if baseball players are on the same team and they get to know their teammate as a baseball player, and they see a little bit of their true character, but if they know him as a baseball player, is that truly getting to know somebody? Under what facet are you trying to know the person? Do you need to know the holistic, completely deep person to say that you honestly know somebody? I think that you would. But I think that's up to other people, because if somebody's in a relationship with somebody, if that relationship is with a particular facet of a person, you have a business relationship, can you really honestly say you know the person if you only know them through business? Some people say, yeah, if that's their primary relationship, then they go, yeah, but then I end up spending so much time with the person that I can honestly say I know that person. But can you? Because so many people throughout history who've had deep relationships with people, marriages, had kids, this and that, have events happen where the person has a turn of character that completely blows the mind of the other person to the point where they say, oh, and I thought I knew that person. That goes completely against that person who I honestly thought I knew that person. And that happens all the time. I mean, it literally happens every single day, probably every single second on Earth. Somewhere, somebody has felt that emotion of, probably right now, somebody is saying, oh my gosh, this person who I honestly thought I knew is doing something that's so out of character that right now, in my mind, I'm saying, I don't know that person. But what they're really saying is that inside that person was a part of them that they were unfamiliar with, and they thought they had known everything about that person, and then a new part of that person, or a dormant part of that person, or just a character trait they were unaware of, came up and made a decision, and it was completely new to the other person who thought they knew him. Which also brings up an interesting philosophical notion that, okay, let's say that you do truly get to know somebody in this ideal state, and then, like, whatever, let's say you've been in a perfect relationship, it's 30 years, you know everything about each other, you've meditated in caves together, even the souls have no secrets, like perfect vibratory harmony and no secrets withheld. Like, it was the honest intention to get to know each other as much as humanly possible, and it's been achieved. And then one person and the other grows. They have an evolution, and it's an evolution that was an aggregate of some things that the other person, there's no way they could even predict it. No matter, even though they had perfect knowledge of each other, the other person grows and now has a new aspect of themselves, a new character trait that was unpredictable. In hindsight, you can see why, but in the moment it occurs, it was unpredictable. And then in that moment, does the other person truly, honestly know that person? That's an interesting moment. And that seems to be a moment for people in relationships, whatever the nature of the relationship is, where when they say you have to work on relationships, that's when the work has to begin. There's many areas where work has to happen, but that's one where people have to decide if relationships are going to continue when unpredictable growth occurs, which is, it's a positive problem, because in this scenario, we'll say that the growth was positive. And then the people have to decide, okay, because then there's a process of having to incorporate that if the relationship requires knowledge of the other person. Not all relationships require knowledge of the other person. Some relationships are transactional, and I don't really know much about the cashier at the grocery store, and it's not that big a deal. There's more of it's a functional transactional relationship. But in a relationship where the two people are trying to know each other as completely as possible, and then the events and functions and behaviors in life that they live together is based on knowledge of each other, when growth occurs in those relationships, that seems to be the chief work of the relationship, is then to incorporate the knowledge of each other, and that fundamentally changes the relationship. Although it can be a superficial growth that, like, doesn't require a complete redetermination of the relationship, but it needs to be incorporated. And that seems to be where relationships, that's where people have to make decisions about their relationships, essentially. Do they continue on? Do they separate? Do they make an assessment Do they make an assessment? Do they make an assessment that it's so out of character that it disrupts the continuity of the relationship? Or do they have such a deep understanding of each other that, well, they already knew that unpredictable growth was possible and they're fine with it, and in fact they enjoy it, and then now it's just a new thing to enjoy about the other person? And people handle it in every conceivable way, you know, ranging from peaceful acceptance to violent denial. But can you really honestly get to know somebody? Can you honestly know another person? I think it's possible. I land on, yeah, I think you can. Do I think it's practical? Sometimes. Full philosophical knowledge of another person, I mean, I think it'd be exceptionally difficult to get there in the intellectual analysis of it. I think in a practical way, you can get to know another person enough functionally to engage in, you know, certain types of relationships with people. And I think that's a key too, is like, not like knowledge of self is hard enough to obtain, and it's a moving target. Knowledge of another person is magnitudes more difficult. Because even with yourself, even when I explore myself, there are things within me that remain hidden from myself through seemingly no fault of my own. Internal mechanisms that don't want to make myself transparent to myself even emerge. So then to attempt to try to get that type of information and that type of transparent transmission from another person, I mean, that's, now you're talking about, you may be, in order to gain, truly know another person, it requires knowledge of other person that they may not even have themselves, because they have internal denial, or they have whatever, not even, you know, because the process of taking something from the unconscious to the conscious is difficult enough. But then there are just abilities and lack of ability to be able to share those things with other people, because they can't even share them with themselves. So even if you had two people that were fully self-aware, which is extremely difficult to do in the first place, and even that's a philosophical question of like, can you even fully know yourself, right? But let's say you have those two people, and then they engage in a relationship where the chief aim of the relationship is to truly know each other, honestly know each other completely. So many factors come into play that, although I think idealistically, I think it's possible, I don't think it's not possible. I just think it's like exceptionally difficult, and it's a very low odds goal philosophically. Now, practically speaking, in the real world, common sense style, can you honestly know somebody enough to live a fulfilled life with them, or have a functional relationship where you guys are transparent enough that you know all of the operating information you need to know each other, you know, about each other's intellect, it's your emotional range, your general reactions, your philosophies, your way you process life, and those things? Yeah, of course. If that wasn't possible, then the social organism that is humanity would have made no progress. It would have just been all static from the hunter-gatherer days. Like nothing, no sociological organizations on any level, from marriage to government, would have succeeded anywhere. So obviously it's possible on a practical level to get to know people to a functional level. But philosophically, idealistically, can you? I mean, technically, yes, but it seems like a real long shot. And, you know, further down the road, are there benefits to it? Probably. But are those benefits any different than just getting to know yourself completely? I don't know. I think philosophically, if you can get to know thyself as completely as possible, then you just have a good operating template to be able to look at other people and resonate with the universal aspects, and then their personalities and their psychologies and their emotional spectrums and all those other things become apparent in and of themselves. And in that way, you can open to have a relationship with anybody, and the type of relationship that emerges is obviously based on the ability to discern between, okay, this is, you can count on these universal human aspects of this person, and then kind of like, here's who they are, because the character traits and the emotion and the psychology and all those other things really speak to who they are as a soul and how they're operating their body, assuming that their body is this set of universal human factors, is the baseline for all of us. And then all the other things aside from that are actually what we would consider to be the person. Because when we say, can you get to know a person, really what we're saying is, can you get to know an individual? And what we're really saying when can you get to know an individual is, can you get to know a person's soul? Because all of these traits that we attribute to a person, the mode of speech, the emotional spectrum, the psychology, the decision making, any of those attributes, they're really just symptoms and effects of the soul inside of the person. Because the soul is inside of a person, and a person has universal human traits. And so the variation between a universal human condition and all of the character traits coming out of them, those are all the effect. The cause of all of those traits are the soul inside of the universal human. And so when we're saying, can we really truly get to know somebody, really saying, can we really truly get to know the person's soul, like completely? Yeah, I think theoretically, practically for sure, but also, even when you get there, we're unpredictable because we're always growing. And even if you project out the growth and try to share it, it still is unpredictable, which it is for each of us as an individual anyway. I can't really, with any measure of degree of accuracy, tell you who I'm going to be in 10 years. I can project based on where I'm at, but it's just a guess. It's all speculation. So maybe you can know somebody for a moment, even if they completely open themselves and even if you have the faculty to be able to absorb somebody in their fullness and they open themselves up to you in their fullness, theoretically, perhaps for a moment, you can truly know somebody. And even if you have a string of moments where that occurs, where you truly know somebody for a moment from time to time, it's not a long-range thing, because growth is always happening. Well, growth and decay are always happening, but change is always happening. I guess is the delta. Change is always happening. Evolution is always happening. That never ceases. So practically, yes. Idealistically, yes, but wouldn't count on it. Well, I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for spending some time here at Philosopher's Corner, and have fun.